Hello music lovers, welcome to episode 94 of What Makes This Song Special. Firstly, apologies for the time between episodes recently. It's been just so busy. I've had so many gigs, so many singing students, and I've managed to kind of pepper the channel with some songs, some cover versions, some other little bits and pieces, but the stories sometimes take a little bit of time to kind of prepare, and I haven't run out of stories, I promise. There are plenty more. However, as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago on episode 93, I'm going to get to 100 and then take a bit of a break from the What Makes This Song Special series and move on to something else that I've got in mind, another little series of things we can discuss, which I'll sort of make everybody aware of near the time. Still got a few episodes to go. So, lots of cover versions and things over the last few weeks, but thanks for your patience for those of you who like to hear my daft little stories about life and how they relate to songs. If you haven't already, please hit the like, the subscribe, wherever they may be on your screen. Share, whatever. Comment would be great, but obviously you have to watch the story unfold first before you can comment. So thank you in advance for that. So as I mentioned, we're approaching 100 episodes, and I'm sure that most of you who have watched regularly or have even watched a few times will know that I've kind of worn my heart on my sleeve a few times on the channel. Hopefully you don't feel like I've come across as the poor me, or that I've overshared. I genuinely just like to be real. I like to be quite transparent and quite real, and just, these are quite cathartic to me, these storytelling sessions. Sometimes just getting things off my mind, and it's quite nice. So if I'm oversharing, apologies, but I'm just being kind of as honest and organic as I can be, and I like to think most of the episodes have been quite funny or quite heartwarming, or generally just quite nostalgic with a little story of some sort that relates to a song, hopefully even from an outsider's perspective. But as many of you know, I have, as I said, worn my heart on my sleeve a couple of times, a handful of times. And a couple of times I've alluded to some of the strange chronic health issues that I went through. And so for any of you, a very brief, very quick recap for anybody who's not watched the Lyme disease episode or anything like that. There's a couple of them. So in 2010, I was a very super healthy, gym going, football playing, martial arts loving, weightlifting, bodybuilding, running, health geek. I worked in gyms. I helped lots of people with their diet and gym workouts. I worked as a chef in gyms, but I would design menus to do with nutrition and all these types of things. And then obsessed with all of that stuff: sport, exercise, athleticism, nutrition, being healthy. And then almost overnight, at the end of the summer 2010, I became really ill with an unknown condition. Nobody could work out what was wrong with me. I felt like I'd been poisoned. I had severe fatigue, pain all over my body, random unexplained symptoms that came and went and got worse, and just etc. And that went on for years until I was finally diagnosed with Lyme disease. I got some blood tests at the doctor, and finally they'd found the thing they'd missed all along. And then many more years of trying to fight that, because that, of course, was not a great diagnosis, a very complicated thing, which I've gone into in other episodes and I won't go into here. But it honestly was like fighting an ever-changing opponent all day, every day for many years. I was very ill at points, and had to battle through a hell of a lot of low points on the sort of roller coaster of symptoms. And then in 2018, so 8 years into that journey, when I honestly thought I was starting to get better, 2017 and 18, I was sort of like, felt like the roller coaster was dipping a few times, but it was sort of climbing a bit of an ascent back to some sort of normality. And some new symptoms appeared that I just never anticipated at all. At a point where I thought that I wouldn't be surprised by anything, and that I'd experienced everything there was to be endured on that journey. Things that I think only somebody who's experienced something like this can really ever understand. And I mean, yeah, like really never, never understand until, because I would never have understood until I went through it, and you just realise how much fight is in you instinctually. You know, you're like, how would I put up with something like, how would I deal with something like that? And you just fight. You have to. It's like you just have to. So anyway, some new symptoms appeared. And these ones really shook and terrified me more than anything I'd experienced until that point. These were different. And I don't want to dwell on it too much, but there were like strange pains that started that weren't like the ones before. Pain at that point had become a daily feature in my life, you know, one that I'd honestly managed to kind of ignore a lot of the time. By that point, by 8 years in, I was kind of, the aches and pains, you almost didn't notice them because they were just there all the time. But this was a pain that honestly made me want to grind my back teeth, is the only way I can sort of describe it. It was a pain that felt like my muscles were on fire, a burning sensation everywhere, and then weird sensations like numbness and tingling in my hands. I couldn't feel my fingers sometimes. I'd like touch them and I couldn't feel them. Freezing cold fingers and toes. My legs felt like they were on fire, and then when it was cold, or if a cold breeze hit my legs, it felt like they were underwater. So it felt like my feet were under the water, felt like my socks were wet, and I kept checking to see if they were wet, and they were dry. My skin was dry and it felt wet. And I was just like, oh my God, what on earth is happening to me? This is so weird. It's so scary. It was just scary. And my arms were like really weak if I leaned on my elbows when I was watching like telly, or if I was emailing. Like my arms were just so weak, they just gave in. And when I was playing piano on stage, I was playing with the band, my hands were, the only thing that got me through those gigs was just pure adrenaline, because my fingers and everything was weak and had come off, and I was shaking, and it was horrible. You know, long story short, it was horrible. And yeah, I had this other weird symptom where I could like taste pepper or spice on my lips and my tongue, and my face would feel numb to touch. And a few weeks of this, as it got worse and worse and worse, I had to basically give in, and it was time to go to the doctor. And he made me an appointment with neurology, but it was going to be months before I got to see someone. And in the meantime, things got so bad that on 2 occasions I ended up in A&E, because I couldn't feel my legs, and there was that burning sensation, and it was just unbearable and terrifying. And as always, when I got to A&E and waited for hours in the waiting area, I finally saw a doctor who was basically just an acute, like a doctor in a hospital like that. They're looking at acute things. This was a chronic thing. So again, they're always quite clueless. I don't mean clueless in a sort of derogatory way. I just mean it's just not their area of expertise. So they're used to dealing with people who have got in and they're bleeding, or they've broken a leg or whatever, and they're amazing at that. But when it comes to stuff that's just unusual and chronic, and they just don't really know what to do other than to send you to, XYZ appropriate department for a specialist to see you. And obviously those things take a lot of time. So mom and dad ended up saying they would pay for me to see a private neurologist, which is just one of the many million things that my parents have done for me in my life that I'll always be eternally grateful for, because it was a real moment of need. And honestly, the day that I had that appointment with the neurologist at Ross Hall Hospital in Glasgow, I was just a broken mess. It'd been too many years of suffering already for me to have to endure something else. And there I was sitting in the waiting room to meet my fate. And when I got called in, the specialist, he did a few tests. He checked my reflexes, got me to move into different positions and things. And then he asked me lots of questions. And then he sat me down, and he told me that he thought that I probably had multiple sclerosis, MS. And the room went silent, and I was just numb, like completely numb, no pun intended with the numbness. But he said he'd put me on the waiting list for a full body MRI and nerve conduction testing, which I'd never heard of before, to confirm this. And I'd have to wait, of course, for those tests, because those tests are thousands and thousands of pounds if you want to go for them privately. And so he just said he would try to get me something as quickly as possible. And that was it. I would just have to wait. And I remember walking out and telling my mum and dad, and getting into the back of the car and watching the traffic from the car window as we drove home, just taking it on the chin. Like I'd taken so many punches already by that point. And we picked up the kids and we left baby Mattia with my wife Lynn's at the house, and we took my other older two, who were still very wee at the time. And we went to this restaurant nearby that my friend Pepe owned, and we sat in the sunshine at the back, and we ordered coffee and a couple of cakes and juice for the kids. And mom and dad tried to convince me that it was all going to come back negative and it was going to be okay. And we just watched the kids run about this little garden at the back of the restaurant. And I always remember, like, in that moment, I honestly kind of almost made peace with it. I was just like, do you know what? If that's what it's going to be, I'm sure there's treatment. And I know a couple of people, like, who have MS, and some of them are really ill, and other ones have had it for years and have managed with the medication to keep it at bay. And I was trying to focus on, I'll get medication, and maybe that'll be the start of me feeling better again. I was just trying to, you're trying to get your head around these things, you're trying to feel better, tell yourself that it's going to be okay. But there was still a lot of the terrible thoughts going on in the back of my head. And we had friends round that night, and we had some drinks and food, and I just acted like everything was normal. I didn't tell them what was going on. I was used to, by that point, like hiding health struggles, from people, because the first few years I kind of obsessed about it all, told everybody about everything, and then it just got to the point where I just couldn't be bothered talking about it anymore, or boring people with it, or burdening people with it. So, but I couldn't hide it from me, that was the thing. And for the next 3 months or so, while I waited for these tests, they were just the hardest months of my life, probably. I couldn't sleep. I lay awake all night watching these YouTube videos of famous Neapolitan pizza chefs making pizza dough. It's a random one, I know, but it was something that took my mind off everything. We just bought a pizza oven, like, just before this all happened, and for our back garden, and I dreamed of being able to make pizzas again in the oven over the summer. But at that point, I just didn't have the strength in my hands to even, like, make pizza dough. I'd tried one afternoon, and my arms were just aching. They just had nothing in them. There was no strength in them. Yeah, these videos just made me think less of the potential decline of my health, when my mind took me down those dark places in the middle of the night where I couldn't get to sleep, and I sort of imagined my kids watching me fade away, and dark times, and watching YouTube videos of pizza makers, pizzaioli, trying to keep my mind off it and trying to get to sleep. And it was a long 3 months. And anyway, fast forward, I can't even remember what the timeline would have been, but a couple of months later, mom and dad came to pick me up one morning for my MRI, which had finally, the appointment had finally arrived. And I lay in this machine in the Beatson Cancer Hospital in Glasgow's West End, and I was inside the machine. For anyone who's been in an MRI before, not a great experience. I was in there for an hour and a half, an hour and 20 minutes, something like that. It was a really long appointment because they had to do the whole body, and you weren't allowed to move at all, or they would have to start the whole thing again. So I tried to go into like a deep meditation and tried to stop myself from having a panic attack. And I remember visualizing myself just doing these like breathing exercises to try to calm. And I would remember like visualizing myself running in the back garden of my grandparents' house in Italy the whole time. I was just thinking about running. I'm going to run again. And so anyway, that was that experience. Then the nerve conduction tests were a couple of weeks after that, where I lay and got electrocuted over and over again while someone recorded my nerve response to it. Very strange and uncomfortable. And then the waiting game again, more weeks of sleepless nights and thinking dark thoughts and watching pizza videos. And then the call one afternoon when I was in my back garden from the neurologist, to tell me that the results were all clear. Everything was clear, everything was normal. And I remember thanking him whilst holding back the tears. And when he hung up, I just broke down in my back garden. I always remember just burst into tears, and I still didn't have a clue what was going on. So there still wasn't an answer, but the fact that it wasn't neurological and they'd scanned my brain and stuff and it was normal felt like this huge relief, because I was like, well, that was my biggest worry, was that it was something really bad, and so I'll skip a few parts, because there were, of course, follow-up appointments with various departments to try to work out what the hell was going on with me, and why I was still getting these strange symptoms, and how to get me off the seriously kind of strong, powerful medication that I was on for it all. And honestly, the amount that I could tell you about that is just, we could go into a whole other story, be here for hours, and I don't want to bore you anymore with this story. So, trying to get to the end of it. Where were we? Yeah, a few months went by, and a letter came through after the summer to see the last kind of specialist I was to see to try to work out what was going on. I'd been round all the specialists again for the second time round, because this is all had already happened at the very beginning of the Lyme disease journey. And I was with, I'm sure it was osteopathy. I don't know if that's the name of the department. And they were checking for things like osteoarthritis and all these types of things. And rheumatoid arthritis. Right, rheumatology, that was what it was, not osteology. Osteopathy, what did I say first? I can't remember. Rheumatology, that was and they wanted to make sure there was nothing else going on. And they just said, we can't get to the bottom of it. This all must be related to your Lyme disease. And that was me signed off. Really strange. I always remember signed off. I remember driving home that night and just still worrying, what about this? What about that? Why am I still getting this symptom? Why is this still happening? What if I've missed something? Why me? Why has this happened? Why? Where do we go from here? And I remember going home, and me and my wife Lynn's went out for dinner that night with our friends Lauren and Craig and Darren and Pam. And the six of us had this amazing night, went to a restaurant and had drinks, and I remember we were just chatting away about football and stuff, me and the boys, and we were just, what's been going on, what's been happening. Hadn't seen them for a few weeks or whatever, and they had no idea what had been going on in my life over that past few months. In fact, at that point, they were quite new friends. They hadn't known me for maybe that long, and I just couldn't be bothered even getting into it. I didn't even bother telling them about it. I'd got to that point in my life where I was just oh yeah, I used to have Lyme disease, and it's, sometimes I still get symptoms, but that's it. So anyway, what about you? I couldn't be bothered to get into it all. I just remember thinking about what that day entailed, and it was so random. It was so random. And over the following few months, I tapered off the meds, and the symptoms diminished, and they never went away fully, and they always seemed to return if I ever tried to do any exercise or tried to get back to me. And then COVID happened, and that's a whole story that you all know about COVID. So then COVID happened, and some people didn't recover from COVID, and they were diagnosed with what we now call long COVID. And all of a sudden, more and more people began to understand long illness, long chronic illness. I suppose I had, long Lyme. I would always call it late stage Lyme or long-term Lyme disease, but long Lyme. And other people maybe had long COVID, or with other conditions like ME and chronic fatigue syndrome, CFS. Those people essentially had long something, as in they probably had a virus or infection of some type at the very beginning of this journey for them. And afterwards, the week, few days, or couple of weeks, or whatever it usually takes to get over a virus, they just never return to normal. And people were talking about it and understanding it a bit more and having a lot of theories on it. And now there are so many scientists giving these conditions so much more credence, and people are starting to understand it all a little bit better. And so over the past couple of years, I've read and studied every bit of research I could get my hands on regarding this sort of mind-body situation that is often going on. And what I've come to understand is that sometimes when your body has beaten a virus or infection, or even beaten it to the point where it shouldn't be still affecting you, because sometimes viruses can live in us forever and stuff like that, you know. But your nervous system and your immune system is left in a sort of fight or flight mode, where the hardware has returned to normal, but the software hasn't, and you're left with this kind of sort of messed up nervous system that fires off all these sorts of pain and fatigue and crazy symptoms to try to keep you safe. But it's actually just making you ill. And I've been working on retraining that over the past while. And it's too complicated to go in here, and you didn't come here for like a whole science lesson on, you know, the brain and the mind and the body and all this stuff. But it's for the first time in many years, I'm pleased to say that I am getting there. I'm getting better. There's the song that I released many years ago, Getting Better, when I wasn't getting better. But this time round, yesterday I got up and I did 60 chin-ups, 60 pull-ups, 60 press-ups, 60, I can't remember, 60 lunges, 60, I was just doing sets of, well, it wasn't sets of 60. I would love to be able to do 60 pull-ups in one go. I think we did it over like 4 sets or something, but 4 or 5 sets. But yeah, just working on bodyweight exercises again, something that I've not been able to do for 15 years, something that I've craved going to the gym, craved lifting weights again. We're not quite there yet. And, you know, are there symptoms appearing when I'm doing these workouts and the days following them? Yes, but I'm trying not to dwell on them. I'm working on ignoring them. I'm sort of retraining my nervous system to respond to things the way that a healthy person would, and trying to get out of that loop of being stuck in sort of ill mode, which is where I've been for a long, long time. So I'll just keep on keeping on. And for anybody who is watching who's struggling with an autoimmune issue or like a long-term chronic health condition, it could be something like that, you know. So, you know, reach out in the comments. I'll send you some links to people who can explain it better than I can, and maybe help you with it. But yeah, apologies for that. This is a long one. That's a long one. I wasn't expecting this to be a long one, but there was a lot to kind of cover, and I still skipped loads of it. So anyway, as for the song, you're probably thinking, where does this song come into this story? So I forgot about the song. The song, when all of that was going on, that 6 months or whatever it was, and it's probably longer than that, but in that chapter, that year, that song was just playing everywhere. It was number one everywhere. It was playing everywhere. It was on every time anybody turned on the TV, turned on the radio, in a shopping centre. It was just on all the time. And I had so many students who would come in to me at the time for their vocal lessons, and they would say, oh, I really want to sing that new Lewis Capaldi song. And I would help them sing that Lewis Capaldi song, and we would work on it while I pretended to them that I was well, because obviously they were paying for me to you know, provide a service for them. So you can't, you know, spend the time looking like you're dying. So you just put on a big smile and you let the adrenaline kick in and you push through. I would work on these songs, and I had no option but to keep pretending to all my clients that I was okay, apart from maybe a couple of the ones I'd got kind of close to personally. But deep down I was terrified. I was so terrified, and that song, which I didn't even love at first, but it became the soundtrack to the whole chapter, which is the whole point in this series, isn't it? It's about how songs aren't always amazing because they're amazing. They're just amazing because of what they mean to you, and that's what makes the song special to me. The opening line where he says, I'm going under, and this time I feel there's no one to save me. That song, that lyric, that line really haunted me at the time, because it was like, I did at points just feel like, okay, this is it. I don't know where to go from here. This is this is worse than all of the other times where I thought things were bad, but I had that little bit of it's going to be all right. This time round, I definitely had less of that positivity in me. I was worried. They were dark times. But I'm doing good. I'm doing much better now. And that's the positive. And I'll keep this really, really quick. So I always do like a little bit of a vocal coach analysis of the singer each week. Lewis Capaldi's voice. Lewis Capaldi actually now lives pretty much around the corner from me. I mean, a 5-minute drive away, albeit in a much, much bigger house than mine. But another fellow Scottish-Italian singer-songwriter. Maybe we'll write a song together about that chapter of my life at some point, you know, if he ever watches this episode or if I ever bump into him. But yeah, quick vocal coach analysis of Lewis's voice. Lewis Capaldi, gritty, emotive, hard-hitting. I think people love the passion in his voice. He's got a lot of passion, and we know, sadly, from Lewis Capaldi's, you know, mental health struggles and things that he's gone through, that, you know, you can feel that in his voice when he sings. And I think that's a wonderful gift. Technically, he is shouty. He's definitely shouty. He pushes... I mean, as a vocal coach, I'm supposed to be helping people work on their technique so that they don't, you know, destroy their voices. But there has to be that, and we've spoken about that before, that style versus technique battle. There's definitely a lot of style versus technique for Lewis. But I think that's what people love about his voice. He kind of wears his heart on his sleeve on stage and he goes for it. He loves to do that down the octave in the verse, up the octave in the chorus sort of thing. And it is a very, very emotive voice. I feel like his producers, or maybe it's him, maybe it's, I don't know, whoever sort of decides on the key that he picks for the songs, I think do him a bit of a disservice. Often it's producers wanting that extra energy from bringing the key up and up and up. What I have noticed about Lewis Capaldi's voice is that he's maybe singing on the record. For instance, on the record for this song, Someone You Loved, he's in C sharp, but often when he plays it live, he's down 2 semitones and singing it in B. And when that's already happening, when you're only, I don't know what age Lewis is, sometimes you'll hear singers doing that. I went to see Sting last week, phenomenal. This is a whole other phenomenal. Should do an episode about that. He was incredible, 73 years old and still going. Sting, another person who's belted and shouted and stuff a lot as well, but a lot of good technique in there as well. But at 73, took Roxanne down 1 semitone, which is just insane. Lewis Capaldi's already dropping things by 2 semitones, often at gigs. Even I've seen him do 3. That's not me slagging off Lewis in any way. I think he's got a great voice. It's just me with my vocal coach hat on thinking, you know, that's worrying that he's already pulling things down quite considerably at his age. Says to me that maybe the producers, or maybe he picked the wrong key for the song just for that extra energy for the recording, when a lot of the time maybe it was fine, just a semitone or 2 down. The new song as well, he's away up at a C5 at a couple of notes in the new track that he just released the other day. Great song, but could it be a couple of semitones lower and still sound great? I think so, personally, and maybe not pushing his voice to its limits as much as it does. But anyway, that's my thoughts on Lewis Capaldi's voice. And there's today's episode. I'm so sorry it was such a long one. I hope you enjoyed it. A little bit longer than usual, but yeah, I say enjoyed. I mean, unless you're a sadist and you enjoy listening to people talk about how much they struggled, then you maybe didn't enjoy it, but maybe you found it interesting and hopefully emotive. Used that word a few times on the episode today, but emotive's a good word. So I hope you enjoyed, you know, the episode, and thank you so much for tuning in. As always, please leave a comment if you've got anything to add or ask about any of what I spoke about today. I promise I'll make the next couple of episodes a wee bit happier so that you don't feel like I just depressed you today. And please hit the button that's about to appear somewhere to listen to my version of Lewis Capaldi's Someone You Loved. And I'll see you next week. Thank you so much.